Joining me today are the co-writers and co-directors of Blood in Them Hills, Christopher Sheffield and Kellen Garner. Kellen also stars in the film as Joe Goode, a character at the heart of the film's intense and gripping conflict. Before we dive into our conversation, here's a brief overview of Blood in Them Hills. Set against the unforgiving backdrop of the Old West, the film follows a bank robber, a Civil War doctor, a midwife with a rifle, and a baby who find themselves trapped on cursed land. They are locked in a game of survival against hungry cannibals, a murderous outlaw gang, and the ancient curse of an Apache demon. Christopher, Kellen, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up? Well, happy to be here.
Thank you for having us. We're very excited to be here talking about our latest film.
And you guys just had a premiere, actually, right? Down
Yes.
in Chandler or in Phoenix?
Yeah. Yeah, it was in I think it was Tempe was the official location, but yeah.
Or Tempe? Yeah, how did that go?
It was phenomenal, man. We had 300 plus people there. It was like we filled the theater, the main theater, I think it was like 275 capacity, and I
Yeah,
was standing in the back the entire time along with a bunch of other people who were just kind of along the back wall because the seats were all taken. And then halfway through that, I snuck out and went to the second theater, which was just sort of like tickets sold for overflow. And there was, I think, what Kellen had was like over 100 tickets.
it was well that theater also had a 270 capacity, and more than half of that theater was filled as well by the end of it. So
Yeah, it was great. I mean, and premieres are amazing. It's like the best audience you'll get because there's a lot of friends and family and people who are just sort of like the perfect audience for your movie. So it's very like reactive and everybody's very like emotional and they're sort of just flowing along with the story. And so the vibes were immaculate. It was a lot of fun.
for sure.
And speaking of the audience, so this film masterfully blends elements of supernatural horror and Western genres. So, what inspired you both to create a unique fusion of that, and how did that inform the audience's reaction?
Well, we as a duo, this is kind of if you knew us both personally and you knew our tastes and strengths of genre, you would know that this movie is kind of makes perfect sense for the two of us to collaborate on, which is probably why I think so much of the feedback so far has been that of all the things Chris and I have put out, that this is everyone's favorite because I really love the Western genre. It's been my favorite genre my entire life, even going back to my early childhood. And and I think for Christopher, it's the horror genre, and he has an encyclopedic knowledge of horror in all shapes and sizes. And so we just kind of put those two things together, and it was a delicate balancing act from scene to scene of how much is this a Western, how much is this horror, and I just personally I just thought the two genres. I mean, it's peanut butter and jelly. It just goes together so well. It's so easy to. It never once felt awkward what we were trying to do because there's so much natural horror in the Western genre already. All we did was, crank it to 11.
I was going to say the magical solution was allowing both of the genres to be sort of interposed on each other because the horror of the Western world is inherent and the sort of Western elements of like kind of nature versus man just works so well in the horror environment. So it was really just like never sort of fighting the instinct to let one feel like the other, and then they just sort of like inherently mixed.
I want to talk about that a bit because I feel like the themes are really strong here, the nature versus man, and what you guys were talking on, it keyed in on some things. I thought that when I was watching some of the, not to spoil anything here, but some of the violence inherent in the scenes, I was like, man, this is so good, right? But then I was like, wait a minute, what is this actually telling me? And it just showed how awful human beings are to each other, and
Yeah.
the horror of what we do to one another. And thinking of that, I was like, okay, there's some Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now elements in this that I really appreciate. But Kellen, as both a writer and a lead actor, talking about that balancing act, Did you find it to be more of like a tightrope or more like peanut butter and jelly when you were balancing shaping the story versus your performance of Joe Good?
Well, you know, we during the pre-production processes, we developed a script, and as we planned out how we were going to tackle this story, it became obvious to me from the on a macro level what, you know, it's dangerous to set out with like an idea about theme. I think it's really, you know, if you start a script with this is the message I'm going to deliver to people, you're in really dangerous territory because either it's going to be preachy or it's not going to land, it's not going to entertain. So we set out to just do that, to entertain, to make something that was, you know, popcorn kind of a movie, and these genres obviously lend themselves to that. But when as we went along and as we looked at the violence and how to portray it, it became clear to me that that was what you're talking about. That message was going to come through. The thing about playing Joe is that he himself kind of lives in a gray area. On the surface, he would be in other movies defined as a villain, right? Because he's selfish, he's a bank robber, he's out for himself in pretty much every moment of the movie. And yet there's a moral challenge to his behavior and his actions that he takes later in the film, and even his relationships to the other characters. You're almost confused into thinking that this trio that we're following are friends, and then you remember the circumstances that brought them together, and you're like, wait a second, he's in handcuffs. He's not. He's This is not the three amigos. So knowing that going into it, I figured out how to play Joe because I knew how he would be perceived by audiences, and it was just a matter of kind of with Chef kind of pulling and pushing from scene to scene on like, is this where he shows his humanity, or are we leaning more into the darkness or the selfishness of this character?
Yeah, and to what you were speaking on earlier with the sort of nature of human violence versus like the natural violence of the world, there's a really cyclical pattern in the film where the closer people are to civilization, the closer they are to civilized, and the further that they get into the hills, the more that they start to sort of like morph into being as sort of recklessly violent or as dangerous as the circumstances in the hills. So, you know, so like and then that's, you know, something that Kel and I talked about for a while with the nature of the creature. You know, we never wanted to it has obviously like elements that are very recognizable for people who are familiar with like Wendigos and that sort of thing. But in general, we just wanted it to feel like a force of nature and to know like in the beginning that it starts as a man who sort of becomes this force of nature and then, you know, repeats that cycle by infecting another man who then becomes another sort of force of nature. And then, you know, like I said, you see that with our main characters as well, the sort of from where they start in the story to where they become more and more animalistic as it goes along. There's very few characters in this film who are able to kind of stay the course and be who they are. And those, you know, you'll have to watch the movie to figure out who those are. But pretty much everybody else is sort of transformed by the experience of being out in these hills and going on this like insane adventure.
Christopher, going off of that, as co-director, what was your approach in directing this film alongside Kellen? Did you both naturally fall into certain roles in the filmmaking process, or was it like you're actor, I'm director, or was there like Kellen, did you surrender yourself to the acting process and Christopher just direct when it was like that time for that scene, or how did that work?
Yeah, we've done this a couple times now. This is several films in that we've sort of co-led. And in prior experiences, it was just me as the like without the director title, just me as the DP and Kellen as the director and actor. But there is just sort of like an inherent trust that we've built around each other. So I think we both know at what point we want each other to be on our A game. And it's not difficult at all to relinquish power if because we both want the same thing for the movie. So what we do is we have a bunch of discussions pre-production. We make sure we're on the same page as far as tone, atmosphere, you know, the arc of every scene, the arc of every character. We get all that hashed out before we start the movie. And then when we're on set, we're sort of open then because we have a clear game plan. We're open to sort of variations as we both experience new, exciting things from like a, an actor's different read or a different take on it. We can kind of jive with each other. But then also on set, like if, for instance, something in this scene is so inherently Western that I need somebody who is an expert on that, then I'm going to turn power over to Kellen. I'm not going to step in when he's directing the actors. I'm just going to focus on the visuals at that point. But then if it's a big scene for Kellen, I'm going to want him to not worry about anything else that's going on in the day. And I'm going to want to run the day, run the camera, run the scene, and give him the sort of macro overview directions that I can from behind the monitor and just let that dude sink into the character. So it's sort of like a dance, but it never feels like a thing where we have to like look at each other and be like, you take this or I take this. Like I think it just kind of happens naturally because like I said, we've done it a couple times now. So throughout the day, we just kind of we both do what we're good at, and it sort of just fills in the blanks. And then the only time that we need to sort of stop the day and have a side chat is when this just sort of natural machinations of an indie production occur and something goes wrong or something changes or somebody's not available or somebody gets hurt or whatever, and we have to kind of step aside and be like, okay, let's redirect this whole scene from scratch. What do we do? And then that's when we have these sort of side conversations where we both kind of come back down to that equal 0 point and kind of build off of each other to find the answer. And then once that's up, we move back into the machine that rolls. So.
And you act in the film as well, Christopher, in
Very
a
briefly.
really horrific scene. Did Kellen, were you behind the camera directing Chris when he was doing that?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about with the what he just talked about never there's never an acknowledgement by either one of us about like who's in charge here. It is a parentage of the story, and just like any good marriage, when kids observe parents working together, it is a hive mind. It's like one unit, and if you can pit one against the other, maybe there's a crack there. But as far as we're concerned, we just both understand what the story needs and what a scene needs individually. So, despite my ability to write and improvise and change things, if you put a camera in my hands, I'm pretty sure I would record my feet, and so we don't want to do
Wait,
that.
wait.
So I trust our crew and people that we've assembled to help us. And so uh, even if Christopher's getting in front of the camera, it's just that it's serving the story, it's serving the necessity of the day, and our goal is to get what we want as quickly as possible and move on and not be fussy about it. Especially with an indie film with an indie budget, you don't have time to be precious about things and kind of pat yourself on the back on look at what a great job we're doing as a team. It's only after the day that we kind of find ourselves sitting and kind of reflecting on, oof, I'm just glad that day was over. I'm glad we got what we wanted. And that's really our job, both as, director, actor. We want options in the edit from take to take, from scene to scene. There's lots of different ways that this can go. And I would say this film, more than any other we worked on, really revealed itself to us in the editing process, where we kind of shaped, and what that meant was some stuff got cut, some scenes, even whole characters were cut out of the overall finished product because we found what the story was, and the themes that you're talking about really revealed themselves to us in a powerful way. And so then it was just about, how can we be as concise as possible and keep the momentum? Because this film, that's one thing we really strive for, was we have to keep momentum. There's no, even if we have characters stopping to talk to one another, let's put it on the move. Let's have them walking or talking instead of just a lot of sitting around. And so that's something that happens later in the game, but it's something that I think Christopher and I are really good at together.
Yeah. And to answer your original question, when I was on camera as a very brief portion, I play one of the cannibals, and Kellen was in front of the camera because he shoots me in the head. Um, yeah.
Which is not a Freudian slip at all.
No, not at all.
It's
No,
just
the name of the character
necessity.
too, that was just a joke on my part because my last name is Sheffield, and most people on set, like most of my friends in life, refer to me as Chef. So, and like so when I was about to play the cannibal, I was like, I'm gonna say something about food. So as it comes around the corner, I'm just like, yeah, fresh meat, and then I get shot in the head. So I'm like, yeah, and I'm a cannibal chef. It was also that was one of the very first things that we shot when we got up to the White Mountains, and it was snowing and it was freezing and it was unfortunate. So like what I handed the camera off to my gaffer Trevor Wilson, who's very very talented director of photography himself, and so he took over for that scene just to get this like cool flowing shot coming out of the trees up to the log and then around the log for the headshot. And it was unfortunate that that was the first thing we did in the day for me because I just took a headshot and fell in the snow. And like so it didn't matter like how many layers I wore that day, I got myself wet. So then like the rest of the day I was just miserable and cold because I had allowed the water to get under my layers. So that was how my day started. But it was great. It was fun. I love doing little small cameos like that because I definitely don't have the on-camera skills that people like Kellen or Chade or Arya, our main cast have. But I can rock a cameo.
Well, I do think you guys should pat yourselves on the back for a couple of things too, though, in looking back, like one of them is the authenticity in portraying indigenous Apaches. Um, from the accurate costumes and makeup to the use of the Western Apache language, filming in historically significant locations, it really adds a profound layer to the narrative. I'm indigenous. I'm Yaqui, which is a Sonoran tribe. So I'm native Mexican, I guess, and rather than Native American. But I'm being from the White Mountains, seeing those costumes. I was like, wait a minute, this guy, this guy's been to the White Mountains, and then I was like, okay, here we go. So I wanted to really, really give you guys a big thumbs up on the authenticity there, because as you know, or as you may be aware, there is a big issue of inauthentic, bad portrayals of natives in film, and I think you
For
guys
sure.
really really nailed the presentation of that.
Yeah,
Well, we can only take partial credit for that in just in the casting.
it comes from two things. One, Kellen from the very beginning, like when he first wrote these characters, like from the very beginning, he was like, these don't exist unless we do them right." And so there was a lot of that in the script, in the initial script, and his initial intention for like finding these people in Arizona. Like there was just we were not going to do it if we had to cast anybody other than natives to play natives. It was not going to work.
Totally.
And the second thing was something that both Cal and I understand is that advocacy is not like it's not us writing a character for them and then telling them what to do. Like advocacy, true advocacy, especially in the arts, is bequeathing power to them to sort of represent themselves in the way that is the strongest for them. So from the moment that they got on set, their wardrobe, their most of their dialogue. I mean, like we had the script and like we had the blocking, we had the idea, we had the intentions of our scenes, but we would basically just talk it out with them and be like, okay, like this is, you guys are a hunting party. You're looking for a campsite. You're looking for signs on the ground. We want you to find a footprint. Um, how do you guys think you would go about this? And then, because of their own understanding of their culture, their understanding of their history, they would then decide like, okay, we would split up. There's two here, two here. I'd find this. I'd want to say it over there. Like we'd be, in this sort of like formation. He has this weapon, so he stands here. Like they were very uh, giving with sort of the cultural elements that would help enhance the scene for all of them. And then the same thing with their dialogue, which is really actually very, very cool to watch on set because so much of as you know, like their history is an oral history. It's all sort of like it exists because they continue to discuss it. So even something as simple as being like, "Hey, what would you say here if this is what I want you to get across?" They kind of bounce that back and forth between them to determine what the actual like words or pronunciation would be, because sometimes, especially between tribes, like there isn't even like a clear like specific sort of like word for or like translation. So they would like find that on set and then decide what they were going to say, which was again really really cool to watch.
That's awesome.
Yeah, one of the neatest things that I think we never like really talk about this. You have to like watch these behind the scenes things to get this, but we never gave the creature a name, right? We never called a Wendigo in the film. We didn't call it anything in the script that was particular that we decided. We didn't want to have any like big exposition dumps explaining what this thing was. It's just a sort of force of the corruption of nature. But when we were on set with our Apache actors, they had shields and like weapons that they had sort of built themselves, and there were paintings on them they had painted themselves. And one of them was this like you see it in the film. This is very like kind of almost like human shaped, like spiky character. And I was asking him about all these different symbols on one of our downtimes where we were just getting fucking rained on. And it was cool. They were telling me all sorts of like wild stories about like kind of the different mythos, but one of them they referred to as the Chin. And I may or may not be pronouncing that correctly, but it was like a devil. And I was like, that is, you have to say that on camera. Like, you have to call our thing that. And like, that'll be the only name we give this thing the entire film. And so that's what he does that nice dramatic, with the wind sweeping through his hair and the trees. Is like, Gene. It's like the coolest thing that we got him to do that on camera.
That is awesome.
I
Yeah.
also think that, you know, the history of native actors in Hollywood being sort of used as props or scapegoated as an easy villain. If you look at historic westerns going all the way back to the silent era, obviously we were trying very hard not to do that, but it also worked in our favor because we knew that our audience would bring that baggage uh, to the viewing of the film, so that when they show up at first and they're it's not real clear what their role is in the movie, that people, our general audience, might make assumptions about, oh, I get what they're doing here, and this is something to be worried about. And then we kind of, not to spoil anything, but we kind of flip that on its head
Mhm.
in a big way, in a sort of a reveal that felt, again, going back to what Christopher said, we knew that if we couldn't cast actual Apache tribe members, and we did do that, that none of that would work, and we would just scrap that whole side story from the thing, and somehow make it work else, in a different way. But yeah, we cast locally from Cibecue and the White River Reservation. We reached out specifically um, and had many conversations with them in the lead up, where I gave them the script, but also kind of talked about what we wanted them to do. Um, so I think that's one of the things we're most proud of, is despite the insanity of this story and the the elements of gore and horror and Western, and there's humor, we still try to maintain some sensitivity to a cultural portrayal where Christopher and I are outsiders, and our characters, our leads, also are outsiders, and so they have outsider perspectives about who they are in the story. And so hopefully that's something that resonates with not just native uh, peoples as they watch the film, but just makes people question in general, like, do I always think that the Indians are the bad guys when I'm watching a Western? Is that just a foregone conclusion? And if I feel that way, why do I feel like that? Was I programmed to think that because of these harmless shows I watched as a kid, or Bugs Bunny, or whatever the case may be?
Don't ask
So,
John Wayne.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it does challenge the audience in a bit, but still with the first goal to entertain, not in a way that we're not making a history lesson here.
Totally, but I think too though, your dedication to that made the film feel more authentic and lends to the story to give more believability and weight. I mean, like if anything, you know,
Thank you.
Thank you.
based
Well,
on
that's
based
wonderful to hear. That's
I'm glad you
I
really
was
did.
able to be in that world, I guess, more more believably than if it was what I've seen in some other production.
Mhm.
Yeah, because
So
the
thank you.
alternative is very, very, very corny, and other filmmakers should stop doing that.
Yes.
Mhm.
Stop being corny, filmmakers. Uh, Switching to the score for a second, composed by Kevin Tye. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, so tell me a bit about this score and how you guys worked with him on that, because this blends like horror elements, but also spaghetti Western motifs. You know, it reminded me a lot of like Good and the Bad and the Ugly and some of these kinds of movies. How did you guys decide how to go forward with the music?
Well, Kevin, this is part of my working process as a writer, and my relationship to Kevin. Kevin has scored three out of the four films that I've directed, um, and he's a very very savvy musician who's got a lot of talents. But he actually, I think I reached out to Kevin about this project before the script was even started. So my first call was to Mr. Sheffield and told him my intentions to write this thing, because this the whole making of this kind of worked backwards, where we actually had a producer approach us and say, "What's next? I want to produce whatever you're doing next," which never happens, by the way. So I wanted to jump on that as soon as possible because that's a golden opportunity. Um, so I went to Kevin because I knew that if we were going to do something like this, that the music was going to be everything. And we had previously worked on a Western with Kevin. And the first thing I told him was, whatever you learned on that Western we did together, throw it out because this is not that. And I started kind of like conjuring not necessarily the story for him, but just kind of the mood and the atmosphere that we wanted to create. And so I was telling him to really concentrate on a horror soundscape through the lens of the American West. Now, Kevin is also a gamer, and one sort of shared love that we have is Red Dead Redemption 2, and we spend probably way too much time on that game. That game also has, in a light way, it has some supernatural elements to it that blend the landscape of the West with these sort of like unexplained circumstances. So there are motifs in that score that have that. So Kevin knew exactly what we wanted right away. So bringing a composer in during the development process is actually for me hugely helpful, because sometimes I'll be writing, and this is true of a project I'm currently working on, where Kevin has already written a lot of the music, even though it's being workshopped. Where if I'm writing the script, I'm now listening, not just imagining, but I'm listening to the motif of that character as I'm writing, which is such a useful tool. And I got that idea from Christopher Nolan, who approached Hans Zimmer before Interstellar was written and just told Hans to write something about a father, the relationship between a father and a son, sort of this like, what does that sound like? And the Interstellar score is largely from those first meetings, comes from that conversation. So Christopher Nolan had written a letter from a fictional father to his son. And based on that letter, Hans went off and wrote his masterful score for that piece. Then Christopher Nolan gave him the script and revealed that it was a huge, sweeping sci-fi epic. So with our work with Kevin is kind of that. In the earliest of stages, it's using his music as a character and not an afterthought, not something that's like, well, when we all get this finished and the jump scares aren't landing, that's where I need you to add more violins. It's a part of the process the whole way through, and I think that's why it's like you said, it sounds so big. It's this big sort of orchestral sound. There are elements of spaghetti western, and there's little humorous motifs in the music. It's just, I can't say enough about working with Kevin. It just elevates what we do to another level, and we'd be fools not to use him.
Agreed. Yeah,
Well,
Kevin is fantastic. He is the most he's the biggest perfectionist I think I've ever collaborated with. There I've never worked with another artist who is so bold as to once you have delivered your final deliverables to distribution, sends you an email like, I found a way to make it better, man. Can you tell them to scrap everything we sent them and I'll send you something new? And I'm like, oh, Jesus, okay, let's do it.
I know
Yeah,
how that goes.
yeah, but it was amazing. I mean, it's there you never want to turn down somebody's best work, and that's all that Kevin ever wants to offer. So that's all. And thankfully, it allows a film like ours to punch well above its weight class with the score because he's out there working his tail off day and night to make it beautiful.
I want to talk about a little bit about these two folks that you guys dedicated the film to. Tragically, two members of your team, producer Michael J. Casanova and crew member Wes Still, passed away before the film's release. Could you tell us more about their contributions and how their legacy lives on in the film?
Michael Casanova is brother of Tony Casanova, who's our main executive producer. The two of them, um, several years ago, they came up to me as a team, as they do everything. They were in the restaurant business together. They were in the video store business back when that was a thing. They owned a successful chain of video stores in New York City. But then their love of westerns actually drove them to leaving New York. And these are two very Italian New Yorkers who left to come to Arizona and live out their childhood John Wayne fantasies. And so what does every aspiring cowboy do? They open a pizza restaurant. Uh, and and they but they also, they always had one hand in like trying to produce westerns. So it was at a film premiere for another film that Christopher and I worked on together and co-directed that I was approached by both brothers. I had met them before previously, but they came up to kind of talk about the film, and they were so enthused by it that that right then and there they propositioned me to say, listen, I don't know what you're doing next, but whatever it is, we want to be a part of it. So if you have something worthwhile, we want to read it and we want to make it. And that was when I immediately called Chef and Kevin and a few others and just got to work. Wrote a script very quickly, and they gave us the green light from the first reading. They didn't say, well, it needs work and here's some notes. They were just like, absolutely, we trust the vision, whatever you need. So Michael and Tony were the ones that basically signed off on this. And sadly,
I was gonna say
as
anybody who's ever gotten a producer on board their project knows how absolutely rare it is that the people who come up to you wanting you to make a film for them like are true lovers of film and are willing to sort of just let the reins go on the process and like let you be an artist and just sort of like in the maybe old world version of the producer and just bring the money and say what do you want to do, I support it. And that's to find a brother team like that did that for Kellen was incredible. Yeah.
Well, and the trust, I mean, these guys are very classic film lovers. So, if I had approached them with a very straight across the board Western, they would have been through the roof. They would have been elated. But when I pitched them a monster movie in the Western space and went off on all the things I wanted to do, the level of trust and the enthusiasm that they had to basically say, you know what you're doing, let's do it, let's roll, was something that I'll never forget. And so sadly, as we began production, Mike was hospitalized with a severe case of COVID, and his brother Tony was, for as much as they were partners, very divided on being there for his brother while he was hospitalized and being on set. We told Tony from on the first day of shooting, like, do not worry about us. We've got this. We will make this movie. You'll be proud of it. You know where you're needed. So, Tony would often be at the hospital with his brother for most of the day and then pop in to our shoot at the end of the night just to check and see how we were doing, uh, which was incredible. And our production was divided over several months, and so there was a break between the first and second leg, and it was in that space of time that we lost Mike, and we gave Tony the space to decide when it was appropriate to come back and finish. Wes also was he's a production assistant on film, but he's really more than that. He provided a lot of costume and prop, and he even makes several appearances in the film as an extra, as a townsperson. And again, and had contracted COVID after a couple of weeks of production, and he also didn't survive. Now we had COVID checks every day on set. We had doctors. We were, doing, this was during, mask requirements and temperature checks. Nobody on set had COVID, and the few people that did, we dismissed from the set. So we were running a very safe set, but just unfortunately, Mike and Wes had been around each other, and and with COVID, who knows what the origins of those things were? Who knows where you got it from? So they both succumbed, unfortunately, and so that film is dedicated to them because their commitment to it and their enthusiasm for it is all over the place. Mike was never on set. Unfortunately, he got sick before we even started production and was hospitalized. Wes was there for a couple of days for the first leg of our journey, but was not there in the winter time when we commenced shooting. So yeah, we felt it was appropriate to dedicate the film to them because they believed in it so much. They believed in us.
Yeah, when
Totally.
you have a film of this size, that there can never have, like every person matters, like every pair of hands on set matters, every advocate for the film matters. Like it doesn't get finished without them, without their participation. I was there it was like a week before filming, with a lot of the sort of construction of the sets and the carpentry going on, and Tony pulling up with a truckload of his own personal Western props, and Wes was there like every morning that I was, just sweating it out with the rest of us, unloading things, painting things, and yeah, like I said, every pair of hands made the film what it is now. So their sweat and blood is in this just as much as everybody else who was there for the whole process.
What drew both of you to filmmaking, and how has your process evolved over the years?
For nerds. I was making movies ever since I was a kid. My mom got me a couple broken video cameras as a child, and I was making films with my action figures until I made friends, and then I was making movies with them. And it wasn't until towards the tail end of high school that I decided to take a leap of faith and actually go and try to do what I want for a living, and go to film school and all of that. And then I had two very concerned parents, so I was adamant to make sure they knew that this was a real job and I wasn't just about to go waste a decade of my life. And just to find out I was wrong. So I was very adamant that like this is going to be a real thing. I'm going to hit the ground running. So even in film school, I was just constantly doing short films like every weekend. And then when I graduated, I got my first job shooting commercials for a truck company. And I spent the summer doing that, and then took basically most of the money that I made from that and shot my first feature, Run for Your Life, with that. So it was always just like a sort of like hit the ground running and try to never stop running. And a few years after that, I moved to Los Angeles and continued to sort of hustle up into getting my second film made. And along that journey, I met Kellen, but Kellen can tell his story. Go ahead.
Well, the origins are very similar. I was in a neighborhood, I remember probably around junior high, with a bunch of boys in my neighborhood. The Matrix had just come out, And we were so enamored by the stunts in that movie that we thought, let's recreate that. And one of us in the neighborhood had a video camera, and it was just, you know, little videotapes. And we had a bunch of like I remember we had a bunch of wooden broadswords that we got from the Renaissance Festival, and we just with broomsticks and
Classic Arizona
swords
story, by the way.
and black trench coats, we were just reenacting all these like Matrix fights. I still have a scar in my eyebrow from a stray broomstick just completely splitting my eye open on a flip. Um,
That's
and
when you knew this is what you wanted to do for the rest
That
of
was
your
it.
life.
Yeah, because the footage turned out so awesome. Of course, if it existed today, I'd be so embarrassed by it. It was probably total hot garbage. But after that, I got into high school. I got away from those guys and got away from that ambition. I always loved movies, but I never really thought of it as a career. But in high school and college, those years, I did a lot of theater. And through doing theater, I got invited on occasion to some independent film shoots to come play a small role. And all of a sudden, it just kind of clicked for me that, oh, this is like theater, but it's cultivated and it's curated and it's a singular vision, and it's got all the elements of the stage that I love, but it also has these sort of magical things that the stage doesn't have, from editing and score and all of those things. And so being on a few independent films sets and just being a cog in the wheel was both illuminating but also deeply unsatisfying, because I felt just as a fly on the wall, like that's not how I would frame this shot. You know, it's just like this intuitive. It's like, this isn't how I would tell the story, or, you know, I would have done something different. And instead of trying to take over, uh, I just realized that maybe I could do this myself. And so I started writing. And then, you know, 12 years ago, uh, I called Christopher and said, I want to make a film, and it's got a very small cast, and it's mildly ambitious. You want to throw in with me? And so that was our first collaboration, and that was my first real experience as a writer, director, and also starring in the film, producing the film with my wife Bridget. We had no idea what we were doing. 12 years later, we barely know what we're doing, but it was as difficult of an experience as it was. The magic of showing that film to an audience of friends and strangers and seeing response was, I was done. It was it. I was like, well, I don't care what else I do. It has to be this. This is what I was put on this earth to do, was to tell stories through film, through writing and performance. And I have not looked back since. And Christopher has been a major part of that journey, obviously, for more than a decade. And so, I mean, when it works, you just keep doing it, you know?
Yeah. As most filmmaker stories go, Kellen and I's meet cute happened on a terrible, terrible movie set, which is it's the absolute is and it's a constant throughout my entire career. All the thousands of productions I've worked on, the bad ones, you just meet the best people, because you both have this like kind of common enemy of like the production itself, or that's like a bad director, bad producer, bad script, or whatever. It's just like, yeah, that sort of communal kind of laughing at ourselves and at what we're doing for a living in that moment, it just brings people together. So it's the best way to meet your collaborators.
I saw a meme today that I sent to a few friends, that it was two guys in an office looking through an office window at a guy on a call, and the text said, "There's no bond like two coworkers who hate the same coworker," and the two were just staring at it. And that's exactly that like-minded, like, hey, what the art of war, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Like, that was being Christopher on the set of this film, of just this sort of recognition of like, you know, this sucks, right? Yeah. let's be friends because we equally think this is terrible.
This could suck together.
Yeah.
It was, and it was a horrific experience. But it was also very it emboldened us because we were like, we're the smartest ones in the room. We can go do this. We don't need anybody's permission. And Christopher, I don't know, had you already shot your film by then? Had you already shot Run for Your Life when we made that movie?
Yes. Yeah. So my first feature, I shot it, and like most young filmmakers, I had the audacity to make the film, but I was terrified of it by the time I got into the edit. And so it sat like unfinished for many years while I worked on other people's films. And it took an older director who had been in the business shooting films. If you're familiar with the film like Monster Squad and stuff, he was like the director of photography for that. Like he had been in the industry for like 40 years. And it took him watching my movie on a private link and telling me the next day on set, like you need to release this. Like you need to put this out and then go make your next one and like make that your calling card. Go make your next one. He's like, it's got enough of your DNA in it that it's a real movie. Put it out there and stop being afraid. And it took that kind of advocacy for me to be bold enough to finally put it out. But at that point, like I think I had already done several other people's features. I had shot Kellen's feature. Yeah, so it sat for a long time before I released it. But yeah, everything is always a sort of culmination of experiences. So by the time I got to release it, I did a whole like re-edit on it and stuff. So yeah.
What's
the
next?
editing room? I just wanted to say the editing room is a scary place when you visit it for the first time because in your mind, the movie you made in your head on the set is a masterpiece. And then you assemble it together and you look at it and you just feel like you've let the world down. You're just like, what is this? And you hate yourself for a while. And then you start to shape it and move things around and cut things out and then they call it editing for a reason. And eventually what is revealed is something that you can be proud of. But that's not something anybody can teach you or tell you and you just accept it. It's something that has to be experienced. And in a way, you re-experience it on every film because the assembly cut is really rough or it's really long or it's really boring. And going into it, you're like, okay, now the real work begins. How do we shape that? This film, I think, from an editing point of view, was one of the most rewarding experiences because unlike other films that we'd shot where it was a very tight, like there's not a lot of wiggle room, there's not a lot of excess. This one we were making decisions about whole scenes that we were cutting out of the movie and moving things around and reshaping things and being forced to rewrite things because of structural issues and delays in our shooting schedule. And I think that all of those difficulties, all of the nonsense that we had to endure made the film better because we were getting really sharp. And by the time we finished the film, we knew what it was because of the editing room and that process. So we were really lucky because we got a lot of time, I think, with this to really shape it and make it something that we both were proud to put our names on.
Yeah, we had, I think, 3 different locked cuts.
When you write the script, it's a structure. So then when you guys write your own thing and then you film it, that filming process is almost like another writing.
Yeah.
And then you write again in the editing.
Yeah, it's every stage is a rewrite. Like there's the script, and then in pre-production things get rewritten. And then just because like a nature of like resources, what you have, what you don't have, a new actor comes in, an actor leaves, things get shifted, and then you shoot it. And then the same thing happens during shooting. Like the natural, Murphy's Law shows up and things change, or an actor you have a new idea as a filmmaker, or an actor has a new idea, or a production designer has a new idea, or you get to a location, you're like, here's the space we scouted, but did you see that room? And it's sort of like it changes in production. And then by the time you get to the edit, hopefully you either like with us, I've edited my own films, but a lot of directors like to sort of pull back and have a fully objective editor to look at all of their raw materials and come at it fresh. And yeah, so and then again, everything gets sort of rewritten because the way that things are on a page is not necessarily how they look on camera or how they're paced on camera, you know. Like, I mean, the bank robbery, I think on the page was like it was like maybe 8 lines of text that just said like kind of like what the town was experiencing, but it didn't sort of elaborate on what the actual robbery was. So that was something that we got to discover when we were in the space, is to walk it with the actors, figure out where the shooting was happening, and all of that stuff. You know, and then that, obviously that on camera becomes a much more breathed out moment. You know, like, and you find like the, you know, you figure out what kind of actors you're going to have on set that day. How talented are your extras? Like, are they going to be able to run around and sort of evoke emotion and fear? And if they do, great, let's focus on that for a minute. And then, you know, the whole thing becomes a little bit longer. So yeah, and then you, like I said, you get into post, and the first edit has all of your ideas at the same time, so it ends up being like a 2.5 hour movie. And then you're like, all right, well, like a lot of this has to go, and it just sort of gets, you know, trimmed down into what actually ends up being. And then even then, like one of the last edits that was done on the film was a scene that was previously just a um, a bit of spoken dialogue, and we in the edit decided that it kind of wasn't getting things across like punchy enough. So then I went back into a bunch of the footage that we had scrapped from other sequences and stuff that we hadn't used. And using that footage, I put together like a visual story as she's speaking and telling the story. Now we see all of these things. And it's funny like how late in the game inspiration can strike when you're restructuring your film, because I did that in like an afternoon, like feverishly. I was like, no, this is cool. This is cool. I'm gonna do this. And I was like doing like little visual effects and stuff with it to like really make it weird. And I remember I texted Kevin and I was like, hey man, like don't hate me. I'm changing this scene. I'm not gonna change the timing. The timing is exactly the same, but like visuals are getting real weird here. So like, you know, maybe you want to play with this. And I sent it to him and he's like, oh, I want to play. And he got in there and like he went crazy with the sound design, and then he like restructured the score in that moment, and all of that happened like I said, extremely late in the game. That was maybe like a week or two away from color timing that we were like doing that, and then I had to go in and color the whole film after that. So yeah, it was like I said, it gets restructured. And then the crazy thing is that a lot of filmmakers don't realize until they go through this process all the way, is that the final rewrite of your film is the audience, because you make it, you know, through the perspective of yourself and your team the whole time. And filmmaking is just a constant barrage of conversations intermingling. So you, by the time you're wrapped, you got everybody's perspectives like in full, and you've had this conversation in sort of an echo chamber over and over again. But then the first time you get a review from somebody who has no idea who you are, who sees your film for the first time, like that's crazy. That's a crazy experience. And you start to realize that your film has been rewritten by their experiences that they brought into the theater or into the, you know, into their living room when they watched it. And that's really the final form, is, you know, when the audience takes it, like the day you release it, it belongs to them. And, you know, your intentions are, they matter in so much as you get to do talks and talk about what you wanted to do when you made the film, but ultimately it's theirs now. And, you know, whatever sort of in their head, their version, their canon of the film becomes the reality of it. And that's the final rewrite. And it's the coolest part of filmmaking for sure.
What's next for you guys? Because, and when you write your next project, uh, knowing what you've already been through this a couple times together, having done a couple projects, when you write, do you guys know that you're going to be changing stuff? You know, what do you, does that inform your writing process? Like, let me write this scene. We know we're going to come up with stuff. So let's keep it just this, and then we'll dream up things, and then we'll edit it later. Does that inform what you guys got working on now?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I had a conversation yesterday. I met with a manager of talent. We were discussing his clients for the next project that I'm working on. And it was our first meeting, so it was kind of a get to know you. And he was talking about the script that I sent over. And I had a short list of, hey, I like this client, this client, this client. I think they'd be good for these roles. And the compliment that he paid me, and I'd not really thought about this, but he said, what I love about your script is these characters reveal who they are in their dialogue. You don't spend any time telling me what color their hair is and how tall they are. And he's like, that gives me so much wiggle room to talk to my clients and convince them that they're right for this role. Because the minute you brand a character as, unless it's necessary for the story, being specific about even, I mean, in some cases, even gender, like age and all of those things, somebody reads that in the character description, they're like, well, that's not me. I'm not right for that part. But I can't tell you how many actors have been cast in our films that maybe they were not my first inclination for that particular character. But their casting of that role is a rewrite because now those words being filtered through who they are as a person and what they bring to the table is a totally fresh take on what that is. The best example of that from this movie is the character of Mac, who plays my cousin, and he's kind of the main villain of Blood in Them Hills. We had somebody completely different in mind for that, somebody that we worked with before, we knew was a good actor. And for personal reasons, he was unable to do the film. And so we scrambled to find a replacement. Who we replace him with is nothing like our friend. And so there's a moment where you go, is this, I don't know if this works. And then the minute he showed up on set and embodied the character of Mac, we're like, oh boy, I mean, we hit the lottery. So I think that's for me going into what's next. That's the biggest lesson that I've learned is to trust the in pre-production, to trust the casting process and be fluid with it because especially as our projects get bigger and more ambitious and now there's certain things out of our control like when it comes to casting named talent, people that you've heard of, they bring a bit of baggage to the set as well because now they have a captive audience who's loved their work for their whole lives and now they're taking something you wrote and making it theirs. I feel like as things get more ambitious and bigger, you have to trust that being a certain element that, you know, if you're lucky enough to get to cast everybody that you want, wonderful. But that never happens or rarely happens. So you have to be open to how your own characters are going to be reinterpreted by a different by another artist.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of funny. Our future projects are very indicative of both Kellen and I's contributions to this film, because Kellen is moving on to make a bigger and badder Western, and I'm moving on to make a bigger and badder horror film. So we both been like, I mean, from well after we wrapped on this film, and at some point during the long post process, we both developed these other projects like separately from each other. So he's wading deep into pre-production with budgeting and all that stuff, and I'm the same way. I'm halfway through discussions with investors, and we've shot a little bit of the film. We've done makeup tests and stuff like that. So hopefully both of those projects will follow not too long on the heels of Blood in the Hills finally being out to the world. Which and this one we with this project, like it's one of the bigger films that both of us have been able to work on. So we wanted to sort of do things the right way and like keep it under wraps until it was ready, until it was like ready. Everything was ready. All the materials were ready. So a bunch of our friends didn't even know we were working on something like this until we put it out there, and they're like, "Oh, what is this movie?" Like out of nowhere. Like, so we're hoping to sort of parlay that energy and excitement into both of our individual next projects, so that we can. Because I mean, we love, I think at this point in our lives, like we've made a couple of films now, we're starting to have a very clear and concise dialogue with our respective audiences. And I know Kellen does, and I do. We love our audiences dearly. We want people to follow our films. We want to entertain people. So hopefully we can get them another movie as soon as possible, and then another movie as soon as possible after that, and just kind of keep people's lives entertained and fulfilled with the best work we can possibly bring them.
Absolutely. And going off that final question, what do you guys both cherish most about watching films in a movie theater, and why
Mm.
should the audience go see Blood in Them Hills in the theater?
Because the theater is church. It is the ultimate way to watch a film. You are locked in. Put your phone in a safe vault and walk away from it and sit down and just dive into this adventure head on with us. But also, I mean, we also cater the visuals and sound and all of that stuff to be the biggest and baddest it can possibly be on a theater screen. We don't make this we don't when we're shooting films, when we're in that process, we don't make it for streaming. We make it for the most immersive experience possible, and that is the theater. So with the big landscapes and the very bold presentation of the way that we shot these things, and like the we just, I mean, literally down to how loud Kevin mixes the gunshots. Like we want this to sort of reverberate, and we want you to be in a theater for that experience. So the fact that that WME is giving us this theatrical run is incredible. Like it's so exciting, and like it's exactly what we wanted for the film when it released. So please, 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 while it is available in theaters, go see it in its biggest, brightest, boldest form.
Yeah, I mean, ditto. Church is a perfect way to describe. Um, it can be a moving spiritual experience to be in a theater, especially when you see something for the first time and it transcends just 2 hours of entertainment. It becomes something that is a part of you. And I think that for me, going back to my theater roots, it's the only thing that really mimics the magic of the proscenium space, that everything within the frame is intentional and formatted for a theatrical screen in a communal setting with other people. And that changes the experience. Yes, it is the forced sort of focus with the dark lights and putting your phone away. Um, Having your phone with you and texting while watching a movie is the original sin. So I just, to put it this way with this film, I mean, this film has been finished for a long time. Obviously, I've made it. I've seen it 1,000 times. I could watch it at any time. If I wanted to open my laptop and rewatch the movie, I could. For many reasons, I don't do that, but I can't wait to again drive down to the White Mountains and watch it on a big screen again, because I know that that's a limited opportunity. Christopher and I both made movies with the hope that one day all of our films would open in 3,000 theaters around the country. We acknowledge that the business is fluid and has changed, and many things are made exclusively for at-home theaters. The technology of TVs has improved dramatically since we were kids. And so theatrical at-home experiences are becoming closer to that, but nothing has touched what happens when you are able to sit front and center on a large screen or an IMAX screen or an Alamo Draft House or even a small local theater chain that celebrates independent film. It's just it's the reason we all got into the business in the first place. It's this conversation that happens both during and after a film's release. That does not happen when it just drops onto a platform and people talk about it online. Even Letterboxd is sort of a shallow representation of what can happen in a film space when people are discussing or arguing over whether or not a movie was good or not. And we try to aggregate that online, and it's just all of it pales to that experience. So I hope that everybody that is listening to this, everybody that lives in that community, will take the time this week to spend a couple hours at the theater, put your phones down, and just enjoy the ride that we're taking you on. Especially because so much of that ride takes place in their backyards, and that was very intentional, and we hope that they can appreciate how rare that is, because not many films are made there. We're proud to be, a part of that short list.
Also, this is an indie film, so there was, and we got blizzarded out of our main locations when we first drove up there, so we had to find locations like crazy the first day of filming. So we might literally actually be in your backyard. So go watch
That's 100% true.
you might recognize some stuff if you go watch that movie. Like, hold on, I
Yep.
know that tree. Hold
I
on.
did. I actually did. I went, wait a minute. I've been to that. I recognize that rock.
That's my cousin's property. You didn't know about that. We were very respectful to the land. Don't
In
worry.
fact, I think the one of our climactic scenes, which takes place sort of around a criminal camp, was probably filmed within 5 minutes of the WME theaters.
Mm.
So not many films can say that they were, literally shot in the viewpoint of the theater's parking lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, Chris, Kellen, it's been a pleasure discussing Blood in Them Hills with you. For our listeners, tickets are now available at wmetheaters.com. Don't miss this captivating film.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider purchasing a Lanny I Got This official Movie Bites t-shirt from gorkstore.com, available now.